This is a primer on what I call empathy advocacy. And this is why you're in this business is that you're in some way or another looking to help people. I mean, I think that's why we're in any sort of business that is about, university, higher education, connecting people with what they need. As a content note, real quick, this does touch on some mental health topics. I just want to sort of make these very aware, very upfront. I understand that some people maybe want to check out of a talk that does. It's very light, but I still want to make sure that people are informed and have the opportunity, which is, honestly, I'll say, the first step in empathy advocacy is this sort of disclosure. So I'm Ryan. I'm a tech and UX writer. I'm an empathy advocate. I don't know how many other people use that particular title, and I'm hoping more do over time. I'm a recovering game designer and software developer, and I'm a lover of emojis. I cannot wait till we can put more emojis in professional writing. Although that is a lightning talk of its own, and sometimes a little bit of a rant. So, and again, yeah, I am he and they. Here's what I want you to get out of this talk. I want you to have a framework of being an empathy advocate of this concept that I'm going to provide that you can start using today. I just don't want to be all high level, here's some stuff. I want you to be able to use this. I want you to have the ability to articulate nuances between different emotional states and associative cognitive hurdles, because a lot of times we don't have the language for what we kind of already know in our minds. And to that end, terms to provide a better understanding of very human struggles. And if you find any of these topics rough, I promise cat pictures at the end. So, all right, what is this whole empathy advocacy thing? It's a form of user advocacy. I focus on the psychological aspects of people who happen to be using our products, processes, systems, whatever. It's an extension of accessibility advocacy, where we examine the cognitive impairments and difficulties in particular, which is one facet of accessibility. And I've bolded where you can reduce this further. It's a focus on people who happen to be using. To frame it like that, rather than thinking about people solely in terms of being users, I instead think of users in terms of being people. And as an aside, we do want to also talk about how some people are in a good mental state, and we want to keep them in a good mental state, but this talk is about the ones that aren't in. And just like accessibility, the idea of the curb cut effect, where we will be able to help people who aren't impaired. When we help people who are impaired, we'll be able to help people who are in good mental states if we help the people in the rougher ones. But even with that reduction, and I still think it sounds a little bit dry. So here, humans are messy in many ways. Software is too, but in other ways. And empathy advocacy addresses when those two mesh. And you go like this. And part of that, from here on out, I'm going to stop using the cumbersome products, processes, systems, etc. I'm going to just call them what they are, things. All of that said, I want to start with the first principle that I'm going to introduce about this concept of empathy advocacy. When we're talking about hard emotional states, we need to talk about how these emotional states are valid. There aren't any bad emotions. At least I don't see it like that, and I sort of take that from a lot of psychology and therapy literature and activism. Part of this thing that I do is recognizing the human experience and not shaming or criticizing people for their emotional states. We do try to tell people how to feel. Honestly, if that worked, we would just tell ourselves things like, oh yeah, don't be sad today, and bam, magic. So why would you expect that would work for other people, right? Instead, we're here to help and offer an unexpected form of care work in a disconnected world where we don't actually have any interaction with our users beyond this sort of like one-to-many, no feedback state. User interfaces, help centers, all of these things, we're doing care work that isn't the typical care work of sort of the in-person being alongside someone thing that the term care work tends to evoke. That said, just because there are no bad emotions, there's bad behavior. We can call that out. Experiencing a rough emotion isn't a license to be a jerk. Is being angry bad? No, not at all. But if someone lashes out at a tech support agent in frustration, that's abuse. And in empathy advocacy, we don't condone that just because we are saying that being angry is okay. Cool. So let's say hello to 3 emotional characters. Although, as you'll come to realize, you'll find out you've known them all your lives. These 3 core characters that I use in these conversations as Avery, the anxious armadillo, Finley, the frustrated ferret, and Blake, the bored bear. And there are a few others that I utilize in this work, but I always start with these core 3 because they really encapsulate so many concepts and are very relatable. Let's start with Avery, which is not Avery's favorite thing to do because Avery is anxious and Avery is definitely does not want to go first. But Avery, it's okay if we go first, you get you out of the way and you have time to calm down later. Each of these emotional personas contains 3 concepts. And in order of importance, the first is cognitive impact, which you'll see here. And then I want to talk about emotional paths out and the potential sources of these emotions. And to start with the cognitive impact that Avery experiences, the impact of anxiety is a reduction of mental bandwidth. It's taken up by dreading potential consequences. The thing about anxiety is that you're in a future state, you're not in the present. And that future state is exhausting, it's consuming, especially if it's dreadful, and you end up being in a place where you then try to manage or control the present or whatever because of the future rather than because of the present. It involves a panicked reading that focuses on alarming words and phrases to the detriment of reading the entire body of work that would help them do whatever they need to do with the thing. And along with that, it's a skittish processing of dense material in particular. Dense material is terrible with some of the anxiety. Oh, it's super bad. It's not sometimes unavoidable, sometimes necessary, always not great. And along with that, and this is sort of one of the fascinating elements of this, for me at least, is that anxiety gives you a disjointed sense of time. Time doesn't work the way you would think it works in a calmer state. The future is the present. The present is a vague fog, and the past either doesn't exist or reinforces fear of the future. It's a complicated mess, and the TLDR is they don't have a sense of time the way you think they do, which will impact if you tell them things like in an hour or something like that, which sometimes you have to do, but understand that does have a different concept to somebody with anxiety than it does to somebody without. And people in these states of distress, like anxiety or frustration, they seek to exit them. So we talk about what their emotional paths out are. Our bodies are hardwired to deal with stressful situations by looking for these exits, looking for these paths out. And in the advocacy work, we look at both detrimental paths out and the beneficial paths out. We aim to guide people away from the detrimental ones. By default, that means we go toward the beneficial ones, but really we focus on the detrimental, and maybe we get the beneficial for reasons that we'll get into. Anyway, but let's talk about Avery in particular. Our detrimental paths are mentally shutting down and walking away, and trying desperately to do the thing, achieve the task with the thing, but breaking down after recurring failure. And take a moment to, in the last year, have you had a moment like that? Then you understand what it is to be an Avery and to feel the pain of that. Now, these don't read like maybe like exit states or user journey paths or things like that in the like UX user journey sense, because Avery hasn't finished the task. It's an exit for the emotional state, and it's disconnected from the exit of the task itself. They've stopped engaging in the task. They haven't completed it. They haven't done what they need to do, but they've still exited the emotional state, and that's what they really needed to do in that moment. It's not a good exit, but sometimes it's what they need to do when a beneficial one seems impossible to get to, or even not visible at all. And for the beneficial ones, relief of completing the task sort of seems obvious at first, but I worded it specifically because I didn't say completed the task. Completed the task is the user journey. The relief from it is the emotional path out. And that difference is really important as we talk more about this, because some of the actions we take, it will influence how we feel. That's like we can't directly control our emotions, but we can influence them through actions, just as other people can influence them through actions. But the actual exit of the mental state is the feeling itself, and we don't have any control over that. Maybe completing the task does provide that relief for a given Avery. Maybe it doesn't. We're going to talk about that in just a moment when we talk about the potential causes. So the second one isn't about completing the task at all, but is about getting relief, is about being reassured. It's about feeling acknowledged. If an Avery can take a moment to breathe and get some space, sometimes in that pause, they can regulate their reactions, and they can use that to kind of like regulate their emotional state. Moments of acknowledgement and reassurance are great opportunities for pauses. But that said, like we like to get people to a beneficial state, we don't have control over that. And to give you a dramatic example, imagine an Avery who found out when they got home last night they're getting divorced. They're living with that anxiety as they come into work the next day, and completing a task in our thing isn't going to fix that. Not that we do anything that's fixing in emotional in this empathy advocacy, but that's a way to say we don't always going to get to a beneficial state, but hopefully we can avoid detrimental ones. On to the potential sources. In what I call User Empathy 101, people talk about the sources first, and they frame the discussion of the sources around what their thing causes them to do, what emotional states the thing might inflict. And I love that people have these conversations. I really, really do. But the problem is it ends up being the cart before the horse. The why actually matters less, and that's why it's the last thing in my list of 3 breakdowns. Because emotions come from everywhere, and you only have control over a tiny sliver of your user's experience. So I list off the reasons that people have for emotions that have nothing to do with what I'm working on first, and then, the stuff with the thing is also there. So more often than not, anything like, maybe you just nearly got into a car accident earlier today, and so you're just like heart's racing, or, you're reading the news and maybe that day you shouldn't have, or at least in that moment, right before doing something that might have been stressful. And anything, even like the random chemistry, like body chemistry or brain chemistry, you just make the heart suddenly beat really fast. That is a feedback loop that sort of brings into anxiety. I mean, our emotions live in our body and our brain. They're all connected. So if the body's experiencing anxiety symptoms, so is the brain. Things like that. And there are a lot of other examples, obviously, like, someone just randomly shouting at you, going to put you on edge, whatever. Things that are individual triggers to you. These are generic, but everyone has their own individual set as well. And you have no idea what those are going to be because you have thousands of users. In my case, I work in a field where I have 300,000 users all over the world, all sorts of different backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, upbringings, cultures, politics, all of that. That's really, and many of you, or perhaps all of you, have the same thing. And that's a really complicated space to be in. And that's actually why I love this work. It's because of how amazing and complicated it is, and how kind of beautiful people are for being this complicated. So maybe sometimes they also have difficulty with your thing, like not being able to log in when they really, really need to, receiving a vague error message, having to do something like that feels, risky, like deleting data, anything like that can also bring anxiety up and kind of turn somebody into an Avery. So now that we've covered a persona, let's highlight another principle, which is about how being seen is powerful. Witnessing someone struggle can help them feel less alone, and that can ease their reactions. I sort of talked about that before, just in the last slide, but I really want to highlight that as a principle of this, because when you can find opportunities to see somebody's potential struggle, especially if it's a common struggle, then you can help them out. I mean, sometimes people aren't even aware that they're experiencing these hard emotions, especially if they sneak up on them. So seeing them when they're not even seeing themselves can give them a great opportunity to regulate themselves, to identify what's going on, to deal with it. Maybe to walk away and do a quick emotional exit and then come back in a different state of mind with intent. That's walking, and it's, in a sense, that's a detrimental one, but used mindfully, it can be maybe a beneficial one as well. But how can we witness people when we're disconnected? Like if I'm sitting next to you and I see you're having anxiety over something, like, that sucks. Maybe I express sympathy. Maybe I'm like, oh, you know what? You've got a lot going on right now. Let me go grab you a tea, anything to kind of help someone feel connected, giving them that pause, whatever. But disconnected, what we can do is we can call out what might be a difficult process. And this is contrary to common thinking, that we don't acknowledge problems in our UI. We don't acknowledge problems with our thing, whatever it is. If it's something's really difficult, we try to sweep that under the rug, right? An old boss that I adore calls this lipsticking the pig. And I'm like, absolutely. Nobody is fooled. It is a pig. You see it's a pig. Yes, it's got lipstick on it, and you're very, very aware that's the case. So I believe it's power if we can embrace a little more honesty with humans and our thing and not just, play pretend. All right, cool. How do we use this? Great. I got a case study for all of these really quick. Avery and the case of the glitching registration system. So this is a talk with a lot of people who are very deeply invested in higher education. I feel like this is probably relatable. Take someone who's trying to graduate this year. And that means registering as early as possible to get a course. It's got a lot of competition in it. Few slots, many people. They log into the reg system. They select their courses. When they submit their selections, the system kicks them out. They ask their friends about it, and none of their friends had this problem. They were all able to submit their selections. So now we have an Avery, and Avery is in a panic with a situation not in their control. Thoughts of their future being derailed by a technical glitch consumes their mental bandwidth, and then think about finances, and thinking about their 5-year plan, and this sort of crushing weight becomes on them. And they have that weight as they reach out to technical support. So what could we offer in this moment? What could we offer for this person? So we can't fix the bug. We're not the engineer team. We can definitely hope that the bug gets fixed, but that's not our job. Our job is about the human side of it. And we can make our error messages, the thing that the human sees, the thing that Avery's going to react to, detailed and without jargon. Hopefully there is an error message and not just being randomly kicked out. We can also, if we know there's a bug and we get a notice that we need to rapidly put together some crisis communication, that's actually one of my specialties at my current job, throw up a banner or something like that saying, hey, we have these difficulties, something like that. And sometimes we have to be that non-specific of saying some technical difficulties instead of specifying the problem. But when we do that, we can push our partner teams, whether it's a product management or engineers or admin staff or whoever, to push for including calls to action in that so that you can give Avery a little chance for control. And then check back in an hour, which again is really hard for an Avery to deal with, but at least it's something that they can hook into that is more than nothing. Reach out to our support center with a really easy link to get there. Maybe even to if there's a known issue site that sort of tracks it like that. Subscribe to an update or a known issue so you can get the notifications even the moment that it says it's ready and be like, all right, I'm back in. Let's do this. And we can structure our help centers to make finding issues easy via clear titles and information that has a good starting paragraphs, which is basic SEO. Whatever's going to, honestly, people are going to search in Google, type your university's name and problem. You get the title, you're going to get a synopsis of the thing taken from the text. And above all, we avoid the graveyard of help known as the FAQ, because that's where information goes to die. Cool. So that's Avery. Let's go into Finley, who is really frustrated. Finley is really annoyed that I went to Avery first, and is just getting more and more furious as time went on. What is that, 6 or 7 slides, and Finley's had to wait through all of that, so it's going to be a little bit of a problem. Finley, there are other core agitated state. They're really ticked off that they had to wait for me, again, to talk about Avery. And I reiterate that because in their mind, they're reiterating it. They're continually feeling that, even though I'm just now starting to talk about them. And they're very impatient because frustration is a state that flares up rather than subsides with time. It is a state that pushes you to action. It is a very natural and human state. One that takes up mental bandwidth with a sense of conflict readiness. Again, you're in the space where your body is ready to do something. You have this angry reading that focuses on irritating words or phrases, things that you're almost on the lookout for. You're on the lookout for threats. You're on the lookout for anything like that, and that's really what you're going to focus on rather than being able to digest the entirety of something. And sort of similar with Avery, you got this impatient processing of dense material. And it's just feeling this threatening loss of control. This is a lot for someone to take on when they're frustrated with something. And maybe take a moment to think about a time when you've been frustrated and with some sort of thing. And have you sort of felt that loss of control, felt that combativeness, felt that sense of sort of being attacked, and maybe trying to figure out if you're attacking back or how to put up a shield or something like that? That's Finley. So, and I just mentioned Finley's impatient. They want to get to their exit path. They wanted there 10 minutes ago. And the detrimental paths out are often explosive or just really, really, really bad. Because frustration lives like pressure building up. And if you think of a person in a situation of frustration, they're racing. They're trying to outrun the frustration overtaking them and try to get to a good emotional resolution path before the pressure overtakes them and they're thrown into to a detrimental one. And to go back to an earlier point, though, this emotion is valid. We can still call it the bad behavior, and we will, particularly in talking about Finley, because blowing up at a support agent or turning a small family conflict into a loud argument or swearing at someone, cutting you off while driving, or throwing your mouse across the room, these are not okay. Can we understand them? Yes. Can we condone them? No. Permission to not be ashamed of your feelings doesn't convey permission to act out. And the beneficial ones here, they look a lot like Avery's with appropriate reframing, and they're as very loud, dysregulated states. There's a lot of similarity in the broad strokes I see between Avery and Finley. They're like siblings in a way. There's a lot to real life that somebody can put somebody in a combative state of mind, and only some of those are due to your thing. I mean, here's just, a couple, some other ones that aren't even on the screen necessarily. I mean, one is on the screen certainly is or getting into drama of social media is one that I've felt in the past before I, really reduced my social media intake. Anything where, especially when you interact with people in that disconnected state of they're just text on a screen, things like that can be really, really, it can just generate unintentional combativeness and unintentional frustration as you misread people or they misread you, and it's just nasty. And within the thing itself, if you are trying to do something and you get, randomly kicked out, or, you get some sort of, like maybe like Avery, get a vague error message, and now you're just like, oh, really? This now? This? That could be the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. And go from kind of annoyance at the world to really frustrated at this one thing. Which, incidentally, is a point that that the sources that come to it, incidentally, and it sort of touches here when we talk to loops, they can combine. You can feel something from outside, and something from the app can compound that and sort of mush together. And so this is a great way to illustrate this principle that people live in loops, and part of the work that we do is provide opportunities to break out of the harmful ones, or dysfunctional ones, or dysregulating ones. Loops is a concept borrowed from both David Allen's productivity book, Getting Things Done, and a concept in cognitive behavioral therapy. In super brief and reductive, it's the idea that people can only hold on to so much in their minds at once, which I also call emotional bandwidth. And some loops are intentional, just like keeping a grocery list in your head, which I admire people who can, because I absolutely cannot do that. But some are sticky and painful, like what Avery and Finley are dealing with. And if you have a painful loop in your head that you can't resolve, frustration in the situation you're in the middle of, a loop that takes up unwelcome bandwidth, or more and more is just going to kind of get consumed before it gets resolved. And so we really want to get things resolved. That's why that racing thing is there, try to get it resolved before it takes over the entire brain and you just shut down. And here we provide opportunities. That's what we can do from a disconnected state. We can't directly help people, but we can provide opportunities to help them help themselves. You can't get in somebody's head if we're not there. Maybe we can in person if we were. And maybe we can't necessarily in person, but we definitely really can't in a disconnected state. So the best we can do is provide opportunities for them to recognize the loops in their head and do whatever work they need to do in the moment to get out of that loop. And maybe they get out of that loop quickly, healthily, and then come back and find the beneficial, path out where they get the sense of, like in Finley's case, vindication is really what they would find very helpful to get out of that mental state. It makes it the cousin of the prior principle being seen. A quick example, earlier this year, I ordered some home gym equipment. The order was delayed multiple times, and after like 3 months, I clicked on the order link just to try to find information out on it. The order link expired. I couldn't get any information about this, so I called up their support line. I asked them about the order. They said it was delayed 2 more months. I asked them to talk to a sales agent because I was just, maybe I would get a deal with it, but I was just kind of frustrated. I was thinking about just canceling. And in the middle of that transfer, I got disconnected. So I called back again. I was done. Like, I actually still want that particular piece of home gym equipment. I may order it again when they're in stock, but I needed to exit that state because I did not want this to continue being a tiny loop in my head for 2 more months. I just, no, I'm out. Like that. And, I didn't blow up at the support agent. I didn't blow up at the salesperson. I do try to be mindful and regulate my own emotions. But what I recognized I needed to do, even though ultimately I sort of know that I'm going to go back and order it later, was that right in that moment, I had to just close the book on that. All right, so Finley's case. All right, so let's talk about some faculty and the dreaded computer upgrade. All right, sent an email to faculty about having to perform a mandatory software update in the next 2 weeks. Predictably, some of them are upset. Some have been burned by other updates disrupting them in the past, some because it's just a sudden and unwelcome intrusion in their day. One of them is certainly a Finley. They were already having a bad morning because their breakfast was made wrong and introduced something they were allergic to, and now they're feeling constantly ill and having sort of GI problems, and they don't like to talk about it, but they were going to the bathroom quite a bit, and people have noticed. And they just feel like their whole feeling is someone didn't listen to simple instructions, and they poisoned them to, that moment of hyperbole that certainly you feel if you're a Finley in that state, because things really feel elevated and accentuated and sort of intense. So when your email hits, they have a new focus for their frustration. Congratulations. And the weight of their entire collective frustration is now just a bit heavier. In other words, this adds to their current frustration loop and it gives it a new target. So they're going to give you a piece of their mind, which again, is bad behavior. And it's abusive. They get into insults, swearing, threatening, shouting, etc. But at minimum, it's not great, not good behavior. And so how can we help them before it goes that far? Again, we're not going to apologize for bad behavior. We're not thinking about things in terms of how can we keep people from lashing out at us, but we are going to think in terms of how can we give people the opportunities to regulate themselves. There's a nuance there. It's really important that I hope that some people are picking up on. All right, keep in mind that your entire email might not even get read. Finley might stop at "you must update" and just launch into an email tirade or make a phone call or storm into someone's office. That's their sense of impatience and combativeness, that very human survival mechanism that ends up being absolutely unhelpful here. It's terrible. It's horrible that we have these things in us that we can't turn off because we live in a society. But we can't. We can try to manage them. There's no switch to flip and say, firmware update, no more frustration that makes us feel like we're animals who need to stab each other. So, going back to the principle of being seen, being upfront about knowing this is interruption in their flow and using some empathy, like, hey, we know this is, interruption and we apologize for that. Or we appreciate your time. If your style guide really saves apologies for critical moments, which mine does. And I think which is important, I still will say we appreciate. I'm very happy to state appreciation. I don't hide that, like when I'm doing this sort of thing, I really try to not hide that this is painful. I'm careful about using misleading terms like painful, though. So why I mentioned that particular word, because some people might be on the cusp of being a Finley, and then they see the word painful, and then they actually that kind of feeds into the thought of it being painful, and then they get pushed a little bit over. And that's actually part of the point. Like I said, I hope for more honesty. I said that earlier, and that there's some common thought about not really disclosing the pain points in there. It's actually kind of where that comes from in a bit, and where there's some wisdom in that, because not mentioning your pain points means you don't get people who are on the cusp into taking that on. You don't get people who are catastrophize. Is one of the words in like cognitive and therapy spaces. Can you give them a value proposition? Take that marketing concept, because if you're forcing a change, you still gotta market it to people. They're forced to buy into it, but you can still make it easy for them to buy into it. Highlight the positives they'll get out of it, and prepare a document that addresses common issues or concerns. Make it a link in the email so the email gets to be short. It's something that support agents or you can send out when you find out that someone has launched into a tirade and didn't actually see that part. And then also FAQs. FAQs are where information goes to die. FAQs are the messy desk that maybe starts nice and organized, and over time becomes the messy desk that has terrible SEO, that has no sense of organization, and frequently I have found has some of the worst customer satisfaction ratings, because people see FAQs and they want their question answered. Common issues I've actually found to be a bit easier, because they see it, they don't see it there, maybe it's not common, how else can I find it, right? So, but FAQs, they were a good idea when they were introduced, and we can do better now. Blake. Blake is the board bear, and if you're like Blake, you've already checked out. Again, so let's pick up the pace. Blake represents people whose minds are having difficulty attaching to material. They're lacking cognitive glue, one like Avery and Finley, who have a very particular sort of cognitive glue that latches onto the wrong things. If you need Blake to understand what you've written, you're going to have to do more work to help them find that cognitive glue within themselves. And I use board. I don't use other, maybe more accurate language, because a part of empathy advocacy is seeing boredom for what it is, a state of mental fatigue. I lean into that word as a continual reminder, as a small way to take a stand about how capitalist culture is so judgmental about bored people, which is a term used against many neurodiverse people like myself. Boredom isn't someone who is lazy or checked out. Boredom is a state of mental exhaustion, and and I'll go into this a little bit further when we talk about the potential sources of it. When Blake just can't connect with the material, they'll move on. Maybe right away, maybe after some struggle. But they're just like, okay, next email or next task, or I'm just gonna go get a coffee. What we'd like to do is help by providing material that sparks a bit of that cognitive glue. With even a little bit, you can get your Blake to engage with your thing successfully. Like if you're familiar with the game or the meme that is Katamari Damacy. I am totally now blanking on how it's termed. It's like that. It's the snowball effect where you sort of roll up and it becomes bigger and bigger and more cognitive glue happens. And here I bring up reaching out for help explicitly as one of the beneficial paths out, because in here it's a genuine win if we can get someone to even get that effort done. It means that they have the mental energy for that social interaction. Fantastic. That we've maybe promised that it feels like it'll be worth their mental energy, whatever little mental energy they have. And it also means we didn't expend a lot of mental energy in them having to hunt around and find that way of getting to a rescue path or an escalation path, able to sort of clearly find it. Is even just hunting around and, click on link, 3 links to get to a support chat box or whatever. All of that and all that reading and all that processing, all that screen flicker is mental fatigue. And there's other things that we can sort of talk about doing. There's, these are really where you can kind of reach out for, get them to reach out for help, get them sort of to understand the reason they should really care, just the one hook, the one sort of laser focus, so they can say oh, and now I have cognitive glue for the rest of this. Fantastic. So again, bored represents a big bucket of topics. Physical fatigue, like insomnia, mental exhaustion after hard work, like recovering from the expense of anxiety or frustration, like clinical depression, situational sadness. Like, emotions are complex and simple words rarely do them justice, but bored is the word that I go with because of the message I want to send with that. You can definitely exasperate someone's already fatigued state with material that's hard to engage, thanks to either poor visual or poor information design. Last case, let's flip this around and make it about you. So imagine a task you need to do on a rare occasion, just often enough that it sticks vaguely in your mind, but not so often that you have to remember the specifics of how to use the thing. And it's yet one more thing at the end of a really exhausting week. It's Friday, you want to get home, you've been putting this off the whole week, but now you need to get it done. How can someone help you from a distance, from that disconnected state that you have to help other people in, or you do help other people in? Let's start off with the thing itself, since everyone will go there and some people won't read your help center or won't read whatever emails get sent out. Can you lobby your engineering team to offer tooltips or help hover boxes at key points in the flow, or even identify users who haven't logged in that system or haven't used that system in a while and offer them a guided tour over again? That's a lot more engineering work than just tooltips, but if you can do that, that's a huge deal. That's like having a person alongside you to reduce the mental load that your brain is already exhausted just trying to deal with. For help docs, make your articles about single journeys and focus on task completion, especially in the titles and the ideally very brief introductions for the purposes of SEO. Make the rescue or escalation paths clear and easy to access for if something goes wrong or if something feels like it's going wrong. Don't include interesting tidbits, especially in preambles. Avoid overdoing it with screenshots. 1 or 2 visuals can be a powerful tool. Many become overwhelming to take in. It makes the scroll bar honestly longer, so you'll just get that visual sense of, oh, there's a lot. You got the general accessibility issues with relying on images. If the task has an email reminder to it, inject a little warmth in the introduction, then get to the core point, the call to action, the critical details. Add whatever info is needed after that, not as a preamble. Links when possible, to just keep the email appearing short, and that also gives links that staff can send out when others have questions, like when they haven't read the email really. And bonus points, you can use really good graphic design in the email, rather than just sort of plain text with a couple bolding and stuff like that. That's all you got. Sometimes it's all you got, that's fine. But if you can do rich text, professionally created templates, that would be fantastic. So great. So let's wrap up here. When I give this talk, people walk away with, "Oh, I'm totally an Avery," or "Yeah, I'm a Finley before I've had my coffee." And I want to ask you to not reduce yourselves or others to a single emotion. You might be drawn to a particular narrative right now, but you and everyone you write for is more complex than that. I'm an Avery. I'm a Finley. I'm a Blake. I'm also Cam the Curious Cat, Pat the Proud Peacock, and even Ray the Receptive Rabbit, and plenty of others. But we are all of these things. And here, let's sort of talk about 5 of the various principles of empathy advocacy. Some specifically called out, some sort of baked in. A no-shame zone. Being seen as powerful. People live in loops. People don't exist in emotional silos. The anxieties from, or frustrations, or exhaustion from home come to work, and work come to home. The capitalist concept that people, when you're at work, you're at work. That's inhuman. And small moments build up, that straw that breaks the camel's back. And I like to end this talk with a call to action. It's great here's a bunch of ideas. Here's what I, would like you to do if you're interested in, engaging with empathy advocacy yourself. In the next few days, when you go to experience something, either you have to interact with itself or you're writing it for others to use, critique it based on those 3 emotional characters. Spend 10 minutes sometime this week about that experience for Avery, Finley, or Blake, or all of them. Talk about how it works. Talk about how it could be better. Don't be exhaustive. Find 10 minutes, write 5 bullet point takeaways, share them with one person. That's how you start becoming an empathy advocate. Just thinking about it and talking about it. And as I promised, cat pictures. There's my site, there's my Twitter, which I occasionally post on. Like I said, I don't really do as much social media anymore for my mental health. And my cat's Instagram. That's it. I do have a little bit of time left for questions. So yeah, see, the question there is, what if these aren't concerned? Like example, like what are your hours? In that case, I still wouldn't do that as an FAQ because that's burying the information. And the problem is when you put something as an FAQ, everything that is vaguely related goes there. And one thing that support agents love to do is when they encounter a problem once, they love to put it in an FAQ, even if it actually is bad information design. And that's sort of it's one of many of its own talks that I have to give is about helpfulness that creates bad information design. But in this case, I'd say that here, like, what are your hours? Make that, if you can make that something clear on your site. I mean, a lot of times something like, here's a side, here's the core page, here's a sidebar, and things like, what are your hours? How do you get help? Make that on the page itself. Don't make people have to click onto a special link for it. So I would say that would be how I would present what I would consider critical outreach information. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking of, we have the tendency to do exactly what you just said, like dump everything in our FAQ. Mm-hmm. But that's a really good point of kind of highlighting those really important non-concern items in another way.
I love the idea of like what you had said about thinking of our users as people, right? Obviously, we think we're doing that, but looking at your pages from these kind of perspectives, and I think a lot of us could probably identify with most of them, right? I'm just like, oh gosh, I'm not to reduce myself. I'm Avery. Oh gosh, that's totally me, right? But looking at it from that perspective, I think, and even in terms of FAQs, right? Then that becomes this dumping ground of, and then you have to sift through that. So having your help center information front and center is actually a very people-centric thing to do, right? So I really like that perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot to go with information design that comes out of good intentions that, while segments of our craft have learned from it, have become institutional baggage for a lot of situations. And having been a government employee before, I know that can be a thing that governments and universities deal with, is that sort of longstanding institutional baggage. Poor or outdated information design is technical debt. It's just not often thought of as technical debt. And even when it is, technical debt is hard to prioritize over fixing things that are on fire or producing the next value that needs to happen.
That's so true. It's so true.
Yeah,
right? You never get to that.
Writing a knowledge-based article that deals with like this little sliver of information, and then 15 years later it's still there, even though it's so out of date. And you've got 4 that basically the same thing, but somebody asked this particular question.
Right. You get that problem where people with good intentions create conflicting sources of truth, and you don't even know where all of them are. Without a really strong central publishing process, people can, with really good intentions, cause users distress and I would even go as far at times to say psychological harm. Not always, but sometimes.
Or does it contribute, right? To
certainly
can perpetuate it.
The straw on the camel.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I'm really interested in seeing how this type of approach will help the return to campus for a lot of folks, because I'm starting to sense, well, I'm anxious about it, but really starting to see it popping up with my colleagues, and especially as we're launching new services in the fall, because it's just going to be overload for everybody. Yeah. So thank you so much for this today.
If I can add a possibility there to help with framing the problem for you as you're working on it, I would consider looking into user research principles. And while you may not have like a user researcher that can do this for you, if you can get maybe like a primer on some user research. One of the books that I have, but I haven't gotten a chance to crack open yet, is from the A Book Apart publishing house about user research. They tend to have really amazing books, though, so I trust this one. If you can take some of those principles in and try to use that to find out, not just assume what your students might deal with, but try to connect with some for research. You can use that and note down their emotional reactions to things and their states, and even just like note down like body language and tone of voice and stuff like that, and have that in your mind as you're trying to construct the really important soothing narratives that you embed in helpful information.
I like the idea of being soothing. You know, somehow, right? Somehow in the work that we do, we can soothe other people instead of being the straw that breaks the camel's back. Right? Anyway, okay, let's wrap it up. Ryan, thank you so much. This was so great. We so appreciate your time and all the effort you put into this. Your examples were fantastic. So, on the mark.
And yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It was really a pleasure getting to